Question 8. In line 55, the great historic bulwark of our happiness refers to English what? And let's read back over this line and the context around it. Thinking is the most unhealthy thing in the world, and people die of it just as they die of any other disease. Fortunately, in England at any rate, thought is not catching. Our splendid physique as a people is entirely due to our national stupidity. I only hope we shall be able to keep this great historic bulwark of our happiness for many years to come, but I'm afraid that we're beginning to be overeducated. At least everybody who's incapable of learning has taken to teaching. That's really what our enthusiasm for education has come to. A bulwark is a defense, like a defensive wall. So in this line, he is saying this great historic defense of our happiness. So let's break this down and see what he's saying here. Thinking is unhealthy and people die of it. Luckily, thinking is not contagious in England. The English people's splendid physique, which indicates physical health, is due to the fact that everybody is stupid, our national stupidity, which came about because no one caught the disease of thinking. Vivian hopes that we, the English of which he is one, will be able to keep this bulwark or defense of our national happiness for years to come, but he is afraid what might overthrow this defense is that people are becoming overeducated. And we know this because of his use of the word but. He hopes they can keep their great bulwark, but he is afraid they are becoming overeducated. So, education is what might overthrow the defense or bulwark, and if you follow Vivian grammatically and logically here, you can see that the bulwark that is protecting the happiness of the English people is their national stupidity. So, A, stupidity is a good answer. If you read through this carefully and follow the thinking and the grammar, none of these other answers, art, education, strength, or dislike of nature, will tempt you at all. The only answer that can be supported by the passage is A, stupidity. Question 9. The second of Vivian's two speeches repeats the argument of the first, that what? So here we have Vivian's first speech, and here is his second, longer speech. And we're looking for an argument that occurs in both of these speeches. And our first answer is A, art has much to learn from nature. In his first speech, Vivian tells us that it is fortunate that nature is so imperfect, as otherwise we should have no art at all, because art is our spirited protest, our gallant attempt to teach nature her proper place. So here he's saying that art is teaching nature, not that art has to learn from nature. The first speech completely contradicts this answer, so we can eliminate A. B, nature is uncomfortable. Although the second speech has several complaints about how uncomfortable nature is, Vivian doesn't mention that aspect of nature at all in his first speech, so we have to eliminate B. C, nature is the primary source of human unhappiness. The only link Vivian makes between human unhappiness and nature is when he says that nature hates mind and then calls thinking a disease that kills people and then says that English stupidity is what keeps the English happy. So if nature is the source of human unhappiness, it's because it kills off humans who are thinkers, not the rest of them. So we can't call it the primary source of human unhappiness since stupid people are immune. And anyway, it's not mentioned at all in the first speech, so C is not a supportable answer. We should cross it out. D, nature is anti-intellectual. The second speech does support this idea when Vivian claims here that nature hates mind or intellect, but we can't find anything about that idea in the first speech, so we get rid of D. E, the failures of nature inspire people to create. In the first speech, as we saw earlier, Vivian says that it is unfortunate for us that nature is so imperfect, as otherwise we should have no art at all. Art is our spirited protest, our gallant attempt to teach nature her proper place. So he is indeed here saying that the failure of nature, her imperfections, have inspired people to create art in order to teach nature her proper place. And in the second speech, Vivian echoes the same idea when he says, if nature had been comfortable, mankind would never have invented architecture. So nature's failure in being comfortable inspired people to create architectural structures. So the best answer, the only supportable answer, is E. The failures of nature inspire people to create. Question 10. Which of the following does Vivian explicitly endorse? This question is very straightforward. A, egotism. If we look in lines 40 through 42, we see that Vivian says, as part of his favorable comparison of man-made architecture to nature, that egotism itself, which is so necessary to a proper sense of human dignity, is entirely the result of indoor life. So he clearly and explicitly endorses egotism as being necessary to a proper sense of human dignity. And we can choose A as the correct answer. Just to quickly go through the rest of these answers and make sure there's nothing tricky going on. B, smoking. Vivian never mentioned smoking. Cyril is the one that brings it up and suggests it, so we can eliminate B. C, education. You will recall that Vivian refers to thinking as the most unhealthy thing in the world, and he is afraid that overeducation might bring down the great bulwark of English happiness, which is their national stupidity. Now, he is being verbally ironic here, so you might rightly argue that he is endorsing education, but he isn't explicitly endorsing it. He explicitly calls it a threat to English happiness, which is the opposite of an endorsement. So we can get rid of C. D, poetry. The reference to poetry that Vivian makes is here when he refers to the way a poet puts something into words as vilely phrased. Now, it's true that this is only one line of poetry that he's talking about here, but while he might not necessarily be making a criticism of all poetry, he certainly doesn't explicitly endorse poetry if this is the only reference that he makes to it. So cross out D. E, thoughtfulness. Well, we already saw Vivian's explicitly expressed opinion on thinking here, and that is that it's a disease that kills people. Again, he's being verbally ironic, but still he doesn't explicitly endorse thoughtfulness or thinking, so we can eliminate E as well. And of course, the correct answer is A, egotism. Question 11. From the passage, we can infer that the art Vivian would most value would be characterized by all of the following except what? Notice two things about this question. One, it's an except question, so you're looking for the answer that does not apply to the passage. And two, it's asking what we can infer from the passage, which means that we're not looking for things that are necessarily stated explicitly in the passage. So, we're trying to see what kind of art Vivian would most value based on the information in the passage, and since he doesn't come right out and say exactly what kind of art he values, we're going to have to infer from what he does say. First, we're going to read through this section of Vivian's first speech where he introduces his ideas about art. And he says, "People tell us that art makes us love nature more than we loved her before, that it reveals her secrets to us, and that after a careful study of Corot and Constable," and these are artists who were known for their landscapes, "we see things in her that had escaped our observation. My own experience is that the more we study art, the less we care for nature. What art really reveals to us is nature's lack of design, her curious crudities, her extraordinary monotony, her absolutely unfinished condition. Nature has good intentions, of course, but as Aristotle once said, she cannot carry them out. When I look at a landscape, I cannot help seeing all its defects." And notice here that he's not referring to a painted landscape, but in context, he's referring to an actual outdoor scene. It is fortunate for us, however, that nature is so imperfect, as otherwise we should have no art at all. Art is our spirited protest, our gallant attempt to teach nature her proper place. Notice that Vivian values art as an improvement on nature. So just based on that, we can look at the faults he finds with nature and from them infer what he might value in art. So let's take those faults and see which of our answer choices might be an improvement on or contrast with that fault. We'll do the most straightforward ones first. When compared with art, Vivian criticizes lack of design in nature, so he would value careful design in art. Remember that this is an except question, so we can eliminate B, careful design. Vivian criticizes nature's extraordinary monotony, so we can say that he values inventiveness in art, since inventiveness would be a cure for monotony or boring, repetitive sameness. Let's cross out C, inventiveness. If we take the definition of answer A, cultivate a taste, to mean refined taste, which is the most likely definition, then we can contrast it with what Vivian criticizes as curious crudities in nature. As crudities comes from the word crude or unrefined, so we might say from that Vivian values cultivated taste in art over the crudeness of nature. But we can do more with this. If we take cultivated taste to mean tastes that have been prepared for use, then we can take a look at lines 39 through 44 and see that Vivian says, in praise of the art of architecture, everything is subordinated to us, fashioned for our use and our pleasure. Egotism itself, which is so necessary to a proper sense of human dignity, is entirely the result of indoor life. Out of doors, one becomes abstract and impersonal. One's individuality absolutely leaves one. So in a sense here, he's saying that our preferences are cultivated or prepared or refined and educated based on art. Our egotism, he says, is the result of indoor life, of living in the architectural art we've created for ourselves that panders to our every need. We develop our expectations or our preferences in reaction to our art. So this interpretation is a lot more complicated, but either way that we define the cultivated taste as an answer, we can infer that Vivian values it in art from this passage, so we can eliminate A. So we've eliminated A, B, and C. Now let's look at the last two answers, and we'll look at E first, since we're doing this as a process of elimination. E, intellectual rigor. This might throw you off a little because of Vivian's digression here, where he insults the English by saying that thinking is a disease that they haven't caught, and talks about their national stupidity and just makes it all sound like a compliment, as if thinking is a bad thing. But remember that Vivian says that nature hates mind or intellect, and that Vivian is not a fan of nature, which means that Vivian doesn't hate mind or intellect. His praise of the English for their stupidity is ironic, as we saw earlier. What he says in those lines is masquerading as praise, but he's really being insulting. Vivian values art as an improvement on nature, so if nature hates mind or intellect, then we can infer that intellect or intellectual rigor is something that Vivian values in art. So we can eliminate E, intellectual rigor. That leaves us with D, moral purpose. Morality is concerned with the principles of right and wrong or good and bad behavior, so moral purpose carries it with it the idea of doing the right thing, and that's something that we don't see Vivian addressing anywhere, either in his praise for art or in his criticism of nature. He doesn't really address the rightness or wrongness of anything in a moral sense. So of the answers that we have, D, moral purpose, is the only one that we can't clearly support from the text. So in this except question, it's the best response. Question 12. In the passage, Vivian ridicules all of the following commonly accepted ideas about nature except what? This is another except question, so we're looking for what doesn't apply. Which of these ideas does Vivian not ridicule? And our first choice is A, art reflects the beauty of nature. In his first speech here, Vivian says that people tell us that art makes us love nature more, that it reveals her secrets to us. But then he contradicts that idea by telling us that what art really reveals to us is nature's lack of design, her curious crudities, her extraordinary monotony, her absolutely unfinished condition. He goes on to say that when he looks at a landscape, he can only see its defects, and instead of saying that art reflects the beauty of nature, he says that art is our spirited protest, our gallant attempt to teach nature her proper place. So he is ridiculing the idea that art reflects the beauty of nature because he says that art underscores the imperfections of nature, so we can eliminate A. B, nature has variety and design. Vivian says that art reveals nature's lack of design and her extraordinary monotony, so this answer clearly has to be eliminated. C, nature is enjoyable. Not according to Vivian. He tells Cyril right at the outset that he is glad he has lost the faculty to enjoy nature, and then he goes on to describe nature as uncomfortable and wearisome, among other unpleasant things. So this answer has to go too. Cross it out. Nature is indifferent to human life. Vivian doesn't ridicule this idea. In fact, he corroborates it here in the second speech when he says, and then nature is so indifferent, so unappreciative. Whenever I'm walking in the park, I always feel that I'm no more to her than the cattle that browse on the slope or the burdock that blooms in the ditch. So, D is a good answer. E, the study of art increases our appreciation of nature. Vivian says exactly the opposite here in his first speech when he says that my own experience is that the more we study art, the less we care for nature. So we can eliminate E as well, and the correct answer is D, nature is indifferent to human life. Question 13. The comedy of the passage derives chiefly from what? A, the triviality of the subject discussed. The subject matter here, in and of itself, is not trivial. Vivian is talking about nature and art and mankind's relationship with nature through art. Many deep-thinking minds have spent a lot of mental energy on this subject, so in and of itself, this subject is certainly not trivial. B, the use of sarcasm. For the most part, Vivian is quite sincere as far as we can tell. He's not being sarcastic. The only time he strays into verbal irony, as we've looked at before, is here in this part of the passage where he talks about England's national stupidity being a bulwark of England's happiness, etc. So we can't say that the comedy of the passage derives chiefly from the use of sarcasm, and we should eliminate B. C, the superficiality of Vivian's analysis. Vivian's analysis is not really superficial or shallow and surface level only. The analysis that the author, Oscar Wilde, puts into the speeches of Vivian are clever and reflect some somewhat deeper thinking, even if the conclusions aren't ones that are commonly reached. Just as one example, we can look at Vivian's analysis of his appreciation for architecture. He says here that in a house we all feel of the proper proportions. Everything is subordinated to us, fashioned for our use and our pleasure. Egotism itself, which is so necessary to a proper sense of human dignity, is entirely the result of indoor life. Out of doors, one becomes abstract and impersonal. One's individuality absolutely leaves one. This is a bit humorous, and whether or not it's a true analysis is up for debate. But you could debate about it, and it would probably be a pretty interesting debate. So the thinking behind it can't be described as superficial. So let's eliminate C. D, witty repartee between the two speakers. Cyril only says a total of 7 sentences, and there is nothing particularly witty about any of his share of the conversation. So this cannot be described as a witty repartee between the two speakers. We can get rid of D. E, paradoxical inversions of conventional viewpoints. You remember what a paradox is, and paradoxical means seemingly absurd or self-contradictory. And inverting something is to reverse it. What we have here in this passage is Vivian repeatedly turning conventional ideas on their heads or reversing them. He takes the conventional romantic ideas about nature and reverses them. He speaks about education as something dangerous and stupidity as a bulwark of happiness. He argues for seemingly absurd conclusions, but even though his conclusions might seem absurd, he makes his reasoning sound pretty good, which is paradoxical. So, of the answers that we have, E, paradoxical inversions of conventional viewpoints, is the best response.